This presentation explores folklore and mythology that includes depictions of death and peril. Viewer discretion is advised. Her skin is whiter than untouched snow. Her hair, black as the void between stars. And if you see her in a blizzard, you're already dead. She is a ghost, a spirit, a force of nature given terrifying form. In Japan, she is known as the Yuki Onna, the Snow Woman. And for centuries, her story has been a warning whispered on the coldest winter nights. But this isn't just a ghost story. It's a psychological puzzle. Because while she is a bringer of an icy death, there is one famous account of a man who met her and lived. He stared into her soul-freezing eyes and walked away. Why? Why was he spared when so many others perished? The answer to that question reveals a creature far more complex and far more terrifying than a simple monster. It reveals a promise made in the heart of a storm. A promise that, if broken, would unleash a fate far worse than a quick, cold death. Our story begins, as it so often does, in a place where the modern world feels a million miles away. We're in the mountainous region of feudal Japan, a land of dense, ancient forests and brutal, unforgiving winters. Here, survival is a daily battle fought against the elements. Our witnesses are two woodcutters, one old, one young. The old man is Mosaku. His face is a roadmap of hard winters, his hands gnarled and tough from a lifetime of swinging an axe. With him is his young apprentice, Minakichi. He's only 18, strong and full of the foolish confidence of youth, but even he respects the power of the mountains. One bitter winter afternoon, they are deep in the forest. The rhythmic thud of their axes the only sound in the frozen air. They're so focused on their work, on making their quota before nightfall, that they fail to notice the subtle shift in the wind. The sky, once a clear, pale blue, begins to curdle into a bruised, heavy gray. The air grows still, unnervingly silent. The birds stop singing. The forest holds its breath. Then the first snowflake falls. Then another. Within minutes, a gentle flurry becomes a blinding, churning wall of white. A blizzard. They are miles from their village, and the path has vanished. Every tree looks the same. Every direction is a swirling vortex of snow and wind. The temperature plummets. The cold is a physical entity, a predator sinking its teeth into their bones. Mosaku, the old man, begins to falter. The biting wind steals the breath from his lungs. Minakichi, though terrified, knows that to stop moving is to die. He half drags, half carries his master, shouting encouragement that is instantly ripped away by the gale. They are lost. Hope is fading with the light. Just as they are about to collapse, to surrender to the snow, Minakichi spots a dark shape through the blizzard. A small hut, a ferryman's shelter, abandoned for the winter. It's a miracle. They stumble inside, slamming the thin wooden door against the raging storm. There's no fire, no warmth, but it's a shield against the wind. They huddle together, their bodies shaking uncontrollably, their words chattering into frozen clouds of breath. The storm outside is a screaming beast, clawing at the little hut, shaking its fragile walls. Exhaustion overtakes them. They know they might not wake up, but they can't fight sleep any longer. Mosaku drifts off first, his breathing shallow. Minakichi, his young body more resilient, fights to stay awake, listening to the symphony of the blizzard. But eventually, his eyes grow heavy, and he too succumbs to a cold, fitful sleep. He doesn't know how long he's been asleep when it happens. A violent gust of wind doesn't just rattle the hut, it blasts the door clean off its hinges. A wave of snow and ice-cold air crashes into the room, jolting Minakichi awake. He sits up, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then he sees her. Standing in the doorway, framed by the swirling chaos of the storm, is a woman. But she is unlike any woman he has ever seen. She is tall, impossibly slender, and seems to glide rather than walk. Her skin is not just pale. It is a luminous, pure white, the color of deep, compacted snow, so white it seems to glow in the darkness. Her hair is a cascade of jet black, a stark, shocking contrast to her complexion. And her eyes are the color of amethysts, but they hold a coldness that chills him deeper than the blizzard ever could. She is breathtakingly beautiful, an ethereal, otherworldly beauty that is both captivating and profoundly terrifying. She wears a simple white kimono, yet the snow doesn't seem to touch her. The wind doesn't move a single strand of her long black hair. It's as if the storm itself is her servant. She glides silently into the hut, her feet making no sound on the wooden floor. She moves towards the sleeping form of old Mosaku. Minakichi is frozen, not by the cold, but by a primal fear that locks his muscles and steals the air from his lungs. He wants to scream, to run, to do something, but he is a statue, a helpless observer. The woman leans over the old woodcutter. Her face is inches from his. She is beautiful like a porcelain doll, but her beauty is a mask for something ancient and predatory. She brings her lips close to Mosaka's and breathes. A long, slow, deliberate exhalation. A plume of white vapor like a frozen ghost leaves her lips and envelopes the old man's face. In an instant, the life drains from him. The color vanishes. His skin tightens over his bones, and a layer of frost crystallizes on his beard. He is dead, frozen solid in a single silent breath. Then the snow woman turns. Her cold, violet eyes lock onto Minakichi. He feels that gaze like a physical blow, an icy spear piercing through his very soul. He is certain this is his end. He squeezes his eyes shut, bracing for the same frozen kiss of death. She glides towards him, and he can feel the temperature in the room drop even further. He can feel the aura of absolute cold she radiates. She leans down, her face now just inches from his own. He can see every detail of her flawless snow-white skin. He can smell a scent like winter frost and faint, distant blossoms. He prepares to die, but the killing breath doesn't come. Instead, she speaks. Her voice is not a sound he hears with his ears, but one that echoes directly inside his mind. It is as low and quiet as the whisper of wind through an icy cavern. She looks at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her deep, cold eyes. Perhaps it's his youth. Perhaps it's something else entirely. She tells him that she was going to kill him just like she killed the old man. But she has decided to show him pity. He can live. His life is spared, but on one single unbreakable condition. He must never ever speak of what he saw this night. He must never tell another living soul about her. Not a word. Not a whisper. If he ever breaks this promise, she tells him, her voice losing its quiet whisper and gaining a sharp, deadly edge, she will know. And she will return for him. And then, as silently as she appeared, she turns and glides out of the ruined hut, disappearing back into the raging heart of the blizzard. The storm seems to follow her, its fury lessening almost immediately. Minakichi is left alone, shivering in the dark, next to the frozen corpse of his master, his mind reeling from the impossible, terrifying encounter. The promise is seared into his brain, a pact made with the ghost in the eye of a storm. He survived, but the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life had just been born. What kind of life could he possibly live with a secret like that? A secret that, if ever revealed, would mean a death far more certain than any blizzard. Minakichi stumbled back to his village, a ghost of a man, his face etched with a frostbite that went deeper than the skin. The villagers saw a young man who had narrowly escaped the icy jaws of a blizzard, a sole survivor who had watched his mentor, his friend, perish in the cold. They saw trauma and they were right, but they couldn't see the true source of it. They couldn't see the promise coiled around his heart like a frozen serpent, its fangs poised over his tongue. He spoke of the storm, of the wind that howled like a hungry wolf, of the cold that felt like 1,000 tiny needles. He spoke of finding Mosaka frozen solid in the morning light. He spoke of everything except the woman. He never spoke of the pale face, the eyes that held the stillness of a winter lake, or the breath that was not a breath at all, but a plume of purest white mist. Life as it does insisted on moving forward. The snows melted, the spring thaw turned the paths to mud, and the cherry trees exploded in a riot of pink and white. Minakichi returned to the forest, his axe feeling heavier than before. Every gust of wind through the pines sounded like a whisper. Every shadow that danced at the edge of his vision took on a familiar, terrifying shape. He worked, he ate, he slept, but he was not truly living. He was waiting. The secret was a stone in his gut, a constant, heavy presence that soured every meal and haunted every dream. He avoided conversation, fearing a slip of the tongue. He shied away from the warmth of the village hearth, the crackling flames reminding him of the life he almost lost, and the life he was forbidden to speak of. He was an island of cold in a world that was trying to be warm again. A year passed, then another. The sharpness of the memory began to dull, not disappearing, but rounding its edges like a stone tumbled in a river. The terror receded into a low, background hum of anxiety. He was known in the village as the quiet woodcutter, the solemn young man who had seen too much. No one expected him to smile, and so he forgot how. Then one day she appeared. He was heading home as dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky. He saw her walking along the riverbank, a solitary figure against the fading light. He had never seen her before. A stranger was a rare sight, and a woman traveling alone was almost unheard of. She was tall and slender, and she moved with a grace that seemed to float rather than walk. Her hair was the color of polished jet, a stark and beautiful contrast against skin so pale it seemed to have been carved from the winter moon itself. As he drew closer, she looked up, and Minikichi's breath caught in his throat. Her face was the most beautiful he had ever seen. A perfect, serene oval with eyes that were deep and dark, and held an ancient, unknowable sadness. He was a man of few words, but he found himself speaking to her. He asked if she was lost, if she needed help. Her voice when she answered was soft and low, like the sound of snow falling in a silent forest. Her name, she said, was Yuki. She was on her way to the city of Edo, she explained, but had lost her traveling companions and her way. There was a vagueness to her story, a lack of detail that should have been suspicious, but Minikichi was too captivated to care. For the first time in years, the stone in his gut felt a little lighter. He offered to let her stay with his mother, until she could make arrangements to continue her journey. Yuki never continued her journey. She was a gentle and welcome presence in their small home. She was kind to his aging mother, quick to learn the chores of the household, and possessed a quiet strength that was deeply calming. The villagers were as enchanted as Minikichi. Her beauty was one thing, but it was her serene nature that truly won them over. She was like a cool, refreshing breeze on a humid summer day. There were, of course, oddities. Small things that Minikichi noticed but chose to ignore, thirsty as he was for this newfound happiness. Her skin was always cool to the touch, even in the height of summer. She seemed to wither in direct sunlight, always seeking the shade of the eaves or the cool of the forest. And she never, ever went near the roaring fire in the hearth, preferring to sit by the open door, even on the chilliest of nights. When asked about her family or her past, her answers were always as lovely and as insubstantial as mist. She would smile a sad, beautiful smile and say she couldn't remember much, that her life only truly began when she arrived in their village. And for Minikichi, so did his. The quiet woodcutter began to change. A smile, at first hesitant and then genuine, began to touch his lips. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a light that his mother had thought was extinguished forever. He was in love completely and utterly. The fear that had held him captive for so long was finally crowded out by a feeling so powerful, so warm. It felt like the sun on his face after a long winter. He asked Yuki to be his wife. Her acceptance was as quiet and graceful as everything else about her. They were married in a small ceremony as the autumn leaves turned to fire. Their life together was a dream. Minikichi had never known such contentment. Yuki was a devoted wife and, in time, an even more devoted mother. They had children, boys and girls, with her jet-black hair and his kind eyes. They were a beautiful family, the envy of the village. Their home was filled with laughter and love, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Years melted into a decade. Minikichi's hair was now flecked with gray at the temples. His children were growing strong and healthy. The memory of that night in the hut had faded to a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. He was a happy man, a fulfilled man. The secret was still there, of course, buried deep, but it was a fossil now, a petrified thing with no power over him. Or so he thought. One winter evening, the snow was falling heavily outside, blanketing the world in a profound and peaceful silence. The family was gathered inside, the children asleep, bundled in their futons. Minikichi sat with Yuki, watching her sew by the light of a single lantern. The only sounds were the soft whisper of the needle through fabric and the gentle hiss of the falling snow. He looked at his wife, her beautiful profile illuminated in the soft glow. Her skin, as always, seemed to radiate a pale, cool light of its own. He was overwhelmed with a wave of love and gratitude for this life, for this woman who had saved him from his own lonely darkness. He smiled, feeling comfortable and safe in their shared history. "You know," he began, his voice a low murmur, "watching you sew like this, so beautiful in the lantern light, it reminds me of something strange that happened a long time ago. Before I met you." Yuki didn't look up from her sewing, but her hand stilled for just a fraction of a second. "I was a young man then," he continued, lost in the memory. "I was caught in a terrible snowstorm with old Mosaku. We took shelter in a ferryman's hut, and in the middle of the night, I saw a woman. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Just like you, Yuki. She had white skin and long black hair. It's strange to even think of it now. I wonder if it was all just a dream." He trailed off, chuckling softly at the foolishness of his younger self. He waited for Yuki to laugh with him, to share in the absurdity of the memory. But she didn't. Slowly, she lifted her head from her sewing. The lantern light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Her face, usually so serene and gentle, was a mask of perfect, chilling stillness. And her eyes were not the eyes of the woman he had loved for 10 years. They were the eyes from the hut. They were as cold and as deep as the winter itself, and in them, he saw not a dream, but a promise long forgotten, now suddenly terrifyingly due. The promise was a simple one, made in terror and sealed by the chattering of his own teeth. "I will not speak of this. Not to a soul. Ever." A promise made to a phantom of ice and shadow. A promise he had kept locked away, buried under a decade of warm summers and the laughter of his children. Promise he had just broken. The woman standing before him was no longer Yuki. The soft fabric of her kimono seemed to shimmer, turning the color of fresh fallen snow under a full moon. Her skin, always fair, now held a luminescence that was not of the living world, a terrifying translucent white. Her black hair, once a river of ink, now seemed to crackle with frost. And her voice, when she spoke, it was not the voice that had sung lullabies to their children. It was the whisper of the wind that precedes a blizzard. "You spoke of that night," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a judge's verdict delivered before the trial had even begun. "You promised you would not. You gave me your word." Minikichi couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The air in the room had grown impossibly cold, his breath pluming in front of him as if he were back in the heart of the storm. He saw the sleeping forms of his children, their small chests rising and falling in the innocent rhythm of sleep, and a new, more profound terror seized him. To understand the cold that was now creeping into Minikichi's soul, you have to understand what she is. The Yuki Onna is not a single, simple monster. She is a contradiction, a paradox of Japanese folklore, as beautiful as she is lethal. Her story changes from village to village, from one snow-capped mountain to the next, but her essence remains the same. She is the spirit of winter death. In some legends, she is a ghost, a urai, the soul of a woman who perished in the snow, frozen and alone. Perhaps she was a young mother, lost in a blizzard while trying to protect her child. Her final moments filled with a sorrow so deep it stained her very soul, tethering her to the winter that claimed her. In this telling, her actions are born of tragedy. She seeks not malice, but perhaps a twisted form of companionship, or a vengeance against the living who get to feel the warmth she was denied. She may appear carrying a child, an illusion, a bundle of enchanted snow, and beg a passing traveler to hold it. The moment they do, the bundle grows impossibly heavy, rooting them to the spot until they freeze solid, a permanent monument to their fatal compassion. But there is another, perhaps more terrifying origin. In other tales, the Yuki Onna is no ghost. She was never human to begin with. She is a yokai, a spirit of nature itself. As ancient and as elemental as the mountains she haunts, she is the living embodiment of the snow, serene, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to human life. She doesn't kill out of malice or sadness. She kills for the same reason an avalanche does, because it is her nature. She is a force, a feature of the landscape, and those who wander into her domain are subject to her laws. In this version, her beauty is a lure, the same deceptive beauty as a pristine, untouched field of snow that hides a deadly crevasse beneath. She is not a wrong soul seeking justice. She is winter's divine deadly grace. So which is she? A grieving mother's ghost, forever searching for what she lost? Or something far older, a primordial goddess of the frost? The legends refuse to give a single answer, and perhaps that is the point. Her ambiguity is her power. It forces you to question what you see. Is the beautiful woman walking through the storm in need of help, or is she the storm itself wearing a human face? Her methods are as varied as her origins. Her most famous weapon is her breath, a single gentle exhale that can encase a person in a tomb of ice in seconds. Other stories speak of a kiss, a frozen touch that drains the very life force, the seiki, from a victim's body, leaving behind nothing but a cold, empty husk. Sometimes she doesn't need to touch her victims at all. She simply sings, her voice weaving through the howling wind, a hypnotic melody that confuses travelers, leading them in circles deeper and deeper into the blizzard until they collapse from exhaustion and the cold simply takes them. She is the ultimate predator of the mountains, perfectly adapted to her environment, using the beauty of the winter as her camouflage and the lethality of the cold as her claws. This was the creature that had spared Minikichi's life. This was the creature that had, for 10 years, washed his clothes, cooked his meals, and borne his children. He had lived in the warmth of a fire, never realizing the blizzard was sleeping in his bed. He had forgotten that the first law of winter is that it is unforgiving. It does not forget, and it does not make exceptions. He looked from the terrifying, ethereal being that was his wife, to the faces of his children. They were her children too. They had her black hair, her fair skin. Did they have her nature too? Was the cold sleeping in their blood, waiting for the right moment to awaken? The thought was a fresh stab of ice in his heart. The Yuki Onna glided towards the sleeping children. She did not walk. Her feet made no sound on the wooden floor. She moved like a low-drifting fog. She reached out a long, pale hand, her fingers impossibly slender, and gently, almost lovingly, brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. The gesture was so maternal, so familiar, that for a fleeting second, Minikichi saw his Yuki again. But then she turned back to him, and the illusion was shattered. The cold in her eyes was absolute. "Because of them," she whispered, and the temperature in the room dropped further still. "Because they are my children as much as they are yours, I will not take your life as I should." A breath he didn't know he was holding escaped Minikichi's lips, a ragged, desperate gasp. Relief, so potent it almost brought him to his knees, washed over him. But it was premature. The Yuki Onna was not a creature of mercy. She was a creature of bargains, of conditions. "I will spare you," she continued, her voice a razor's edge of quiet fury. "But my promise is now bound to yours. You broke your vow to me. So now you will make a new one. You will care for these children. You will be a perfect father. If they ever have a single reason to cry because of you, if you ever cause them a moment of harm or sorrow, I will know, and I will return. And the death I give you then will make the one I promised your friend Mosako seem like the warmth of a summer's day." She leaned closer, her face inches from his, and he could see the intricate, crystalline patterns of frost forming in the depths of her pupils. "And this time," she breathed, her words a frozen mist against his skin, "you will not be the only one I take." His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silent symphony of the snow. For a frozen second he was a statue, a man of ice just like her victims, his breath caught in his throat. The world was nothing but her eyes, twin abysses of winter. Then the instinct for survival, the primal terror for his family, shattered the paralysis. He scrambled backward, falling into the snowbank, the cold a brutal shock that jolted him into motion. He turned and ran. He didn't run like a man fleeing a beast of tooth and claw. He ran like a soul trying to outpace its own damnation. Every crunch of his boots in the snow was a gunshot in the crushing silence. The wind, once a mere nuisance, was now her voice, a sibilant whisper that coiled around his ears, carrying fragments of his broken promise. The trees, his old familiar guides, now seemed to twist into skeletal figures, their snow-laden branches reaching for him like long, pale fingers. He dared not look back. He knew with a certainty that was colder than the air he gasped, that he wouldn't see her chasing him. She didn't need to. Her threat was a poison already working its way through his veins. She wasn't behind him. She was ahead of him. She was waiting. The lights of his village were a faint, flickering hope in the distance. He'd never run so hard, his lungs burning with icy fire, his muscles screaming in protest. This was the same path he walked every day. But tonight it was a hostile alien landscape. He saw his own small cottage, a plume of smoke rising from the hearth, a beacon of warmth and life. But instead of relief, a new, more potent wave of dread washed over him. That smoke meant his fire was lit. It meant his wife and children were home. They were there, unprotected. He burst through the door, a whirlwind of snow and panicked breath, slamming it shut behind him and fumbling with the wooden latch. The sudden warmth of the room was a physical blow. For a moment, everything was normal. The smell of cedar wood and miso soup, the soft glow of the oil lamp, and his wife Yuki turning from the hearth, her face a perfect, placid oval. "Mosaku," she said, her voice the gentle murmur of a calm sea. "You are back so late. The storm is terrible. I was worried." He couldn't speak. He could only stare, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the horrors he had seen. He looked for any sign of intrusion, any hint of disturbance. A broken window, a door ajar, a footprint in the snow that wasn't his. There was nothing, only peace, a terrifying absolute peace. "What is it, my husband?" she asked, gliding towards him. She reached up to brush the snow from his shoulders, and her touch was cool. It had always been cool. He'd once thought it was refreshing, a pleasant contrast to his own warmth after a long day's work. Tonight it felt like the touch of a grave. "The children," he rasped, his voice raw. "Where are the children?" "They are sleeping," Yuki replied, her expression unchanged. "They grew tired waiting for you. Come sit. You are frozen through." He stumbled past her, his legs trembling, and went to the small room where his two sons slept. He slid the paper screen open with a shaking hand. They were there, nestled together under a thick quilt, their faces rosy and peaceful in the dim light. He knelt beside them, his heart aching with a desperate love. He reached out to touch his eldest son's cheek. It was cold, not the deathly cold of the forest, but the deep, unnatural chill of a room where the hearth fire has long since died, even though the main fire was blazing only a few feet away. A small puff of white mist escaped his son's lips with each gentle breath, just like hers. He backed away slowly, sliding the screen shut with a soft click. The sound was deafening. He returned to the main room. Yuki was ladling soup into a bowl for him. She moved with an impossible grace, a fluidity that seemed to waste no energy, to create no sound. She was the picture of a devoted wife, her dark hair pinned up neatly, her simple kimono immaculate. But as the lamplight caught her profile, he saw it. The impossible pallor of her skin. It wasn't the healthy pale of a woman who worked indoors. It was the luminous, light-drinking white of a snowdrift under a full moon. He sat down, his limbs heavy as stone. He took the bowl she offered, the warmth of the ceramic a small, fleeting comfort in his numb hands. "You told a story tonight, didn't you, my husband?" she asked, her voice soft, conversational. She sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. Mosaku froze, the spoon halfway to his lips. His blood turned to ice water. How could she possibly know? "The men at the sake house," he lied, his voice barely a whisper. "Just old tales to pass the time." "An old tale," she repeated, her voice perfectly level. "About a woman of the snow." He couldn't look at her. He stared down into his soup, his own terrified face reflected in the shimmering surface. He had told the story, the one he had sworn on his life never to repeat, and he had told it just last night. Right here, in this room, to her. He remembered the scene perfectly. The children were asleep. The snow was falling outside. He had been drinking, feeling bold and expansive, wanting to share the most profound secret of his life with the woman he loved. He had told her everything. About the blizzard, about his master Minikichi frozen solid, and about the beautiful, terrifying creature who had spared him. He remembered Yuki's reaction. She hadn't gasped. She hadn't recoiled in fear. She had simply listened, her dark eyes fixed on his, her expression unreadable. When he had finished, she had said nothing at all, merely rising to put more wood on the fire. At the time, he had mistaken her silence for shock, or perhaps disbelief. Now he saw it for what it was. Recognition. His mind began to race, tumbling through the years of their marriage, grabbing at memories that suddenly felt sharp and dangerous. Her name, Yuki. Snow. A common enough name, he had always told himself. Coincidence? Her aversion to hot baths, how she would claim the steam made her dizzy, her skin flushing a painful, angry red if she ever got too warm. The way she could walk barefoot in the snow to fetch water and never seem to feel the cold. The strange, stillborn silence that fell over the forest whenever she walked through it with him, as if the very birds and insects were holding their breath. All these details, these tiny, insignificant quirks, he had woven into the tapestry of the woman he loved, now unraveled before him, revealing a pattern of monstrous, impossible truth. He had been spared by the Yuki Onna 10 years ago, and a few months later, A beautiful, pale woman with no family and no past had appeared in his village. A woman named Yuki. A woman he had married. He looked up from his bowl, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger in her face, no malice. There was only the calm, patient, and eternal cold of the deepest winter. She knew. She had always known. His promise wasn't just to a phantom from a snowstorm. He had made his promise to his wife, and he had broken it. He lay beside her that night on their futon, pretending to be asleep, his body rigid with a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. He listened to her breathe. It was a shallow, almost imperceptible rhythm, as faint as the sound of snow falling on snow. He had to know. He had to be sure. With a hand that shook so violently he could barely control it, he slowly, carefully, reached across the space between them. He let his fingers brush against the bare skin of her arm. It was not the cool touch of a living person in a cold room. It was the absolute, soul-stealing cold of a block of ice. It was the cold of the blizzard, the cold of the dead, the cold of the woman who had let him live, and who had now come to collect her price. His blood ran cold, not with the chill of the room, but with the chilling frost of memory. The face, once a source of comfort and love, now mirrored the pale, ethereal beauty of the specter from the woods. The voice, once a gentle melody, now held the sharp, crystalline edge of a winter wind. He saw it all in an instant. 10 years of warmth, 10 years of laughter, 10 years of a shared life. All of it a beautiful, fragile lie, spun from snow and held together by a single terrifying promise. She rose from the floor, not like a woman getting to her feet, but like a mist rising from a frozen lake. Her movements were unnaturally fluid, silent. The soft, warm colors of her kimono seemed to drain away, leaching into the shadows, leaving behind a fabric that was the pure, stark white of a fresh snowfall. Her black hair, once tied up with care, seemed to lengthen, to flow around her like a living shadow against the impossible white of her skin. Her eyes, those warm, dark pools he had fallen in love with, now held the cold, distant light of a winter moon. "You spoke," she said, and the words were not spoken but formed. They were the sound of ice cracking, of a final frozen breath. "You told her. You told another soul of what you saw that night." Minikichi couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His throat was a column of ice. He could only stare at the woman who was his wife, and the monster who was his doom. "I told you," she whispered, the sound slithering into the very marrow of his bones. "I warned you that if you ever spoke of it, I would kill you. I should kill you now. I should freeze the very heart in your chest, and leave you a statue of broken promises for the morning sun to find." She took a step toward him, and the floorboards groaned under a weight that was not human. A visible frost spread from her bare feet, tracing delicate, deadly patterns across the wood. The air grew painfully cold, so cold it burned his lungs to breathe. He could see his own breath fogging in front of him, a desperate, fleeting cloud of life in a room that was rapidly becoming a tomb. He thought of his children, his beautiful, sleeping children, tucked away in the other room, dreaming their innocent dreams. He had to do something. He had to plead, to beg. But what could he say? He had broken the one rule, the one sacred vow that had granted him his life, his family, his happiness. But as the Yuki Onna raised a hand, so pale it was nearly translucent, she paused. Her gaze flickered toward the room where the children slept. A flicker of something other than cold rage, passed across her features. It was not warmth, not love. It was something more complex. A conflict, a memory of a life she had lived, a role she had played. "But the children," she hissed, the sound a low glacial grind. "If it were not for them, you would be dead where you stand. But I cannot bring them that sorrow. I cannot have them wake to find their father a frozen corpse and their mother gone." She lowered her hand. The killing frost in the air receded just slightly. The pressure in the room lessened from unbearable to merely terrifying. "You will care for them," she commanded, her voice devoid of all emotion now, a flat, dead thing. "You will raise them well. But if they have cause for a single complaint against you, if you ever cause them a moment of true pain, I will return, and I will finish what I should have done all those years ago. That is my new promise. And I do not break mine." And then she simply dissolved. She didn't walk out the door. She didn't vanish in a flash of light. She unraveled. Her form became a swirling flurry of impossibly fine snow, a miniature blizzard contained within the walls of the small house. The flurry spun for a moment, a vortex of white and black, and then it was sucked out through the cracks in the walls, pulled into the night from whence it came. And Minikichi was alone. The room was silent, save for the frantic, terrified hammering of his own heart. The oppressive cold was gone, leaving only the normal chill of a winter's night. But a deeper cold remained, a cold that would never leave him. He stumbled to the children's room and looked upon their sleeping faces, their chests rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of life, and he wept. He wept for the wife he had loved and lost, and for the monster he had just survived. He wept for the beautiful lie he had lived for 10 years, and for the terrifying truth he would have to live with for the rest of his days. This is the version of the Yuki Onna story made famous by the writer Lafcadio Hearn in his 1904 book, coined Stories and Studies of Strange Things. It is, by far, the most well-known telling of the legend. It paints the Snow Woman as a being of stark, terrifying duality. She is both a supernatural predator and a creature capable of human emotion, of love, of maternal instinct. She is a being of strict, unwavering codes. She gives a promise and she keeps it. She demands a promise, and she expects it to be kept. The punishment for breaking that promise is absolute. But this is only one face of the Snow Woman. Like any truly powerful myth, her story changes depending on who is telling it. The Yuki Onna is not a single monolithic entity. She is a regional phenomenon, a collection of fears and folktales that coalesce differently in the mountain villages and snowy prefectures of Japan. In some regions like Niigata, she is seen as a more vampiric figure. She is the Yukijoro, the snow prostitute, a name that hints at her seductive nature. In these tales, she doesn't just freeze her victims. She drains their life force, their very soul, leaving them as empty, frozen husks. She is a succubus of the cold, using her beauty to lure unsuspecting men, often travelers lost in a storm, into a fatal embrace. Her kiss doesn't just bring death, it brings a spiritual annihilation. In other prefectures like Gifu, the tale takes on a more monstrous, less human form. There, she is sometimes depicted as a one-legged creature with the eye of a cyclops, a true monster of the snow that hops through the blizzard, hunting for lost children. Here, the beautiful, seductive woman is gone, replaced by a primal, terrifying bogeyman, a story told to keep kids from wandering off into the deadly white wilderness. And then there are the tragic versions. In some stories, the Yuki Onna isn't a predator at all, but a victim. She is the ghost of a woman who froze to death in the snow, perhaps with her child. In these tellings, she doesn't seek to harm, but to warn. She appears to travelers to guide them away from dangerous paths, or to lead them to shelter. She is a sorrowful, benevolent spirit, her cold touch a sad reminder of her own fate, not a weapon to be used against others. Sometimes she simply wants a moment of warmth, to hold a living baby, a desperate attempt to reconnect with the life she lost. But her very nature is death. In her ghostly arms, the baby she means to comfort freezes solid, compounding her eternal tragedy. This incredible variety is what makes the Yuki Onna so compelling. She is not one thing. She is a personification of winter itself. And winter is never just one thing. It is beautiful and it is deadly. It is serene and it is violent. It can offer the quiet peace of a snow-covered forest, and it can bring the howling fury of a blizzard that strips the flesh from your bones. The Yuki Onna embodies this paradox. Is she the beautiful woman you fall in love with, or the icy demon who murders you for breaking a promise? Is she the seductive vampire who drains your soul, or the tragic ghost who only wants to feel warmth again? The answer is yes. She is all of these things. She is a reflection of our own relationship with the natural world, our awe at its beauty, and our terror at its unforgiving power. She represents the fear that something beautiful can hide something deadly. A pristine, untouched field of snow can hide a deep crevasse. A beautiful, mysterious stranger can hide a monstrous secret. This is a deep, primal human fear. The fear that the person you trust the most, the person you share your bed with, could be a complete unknown, a monster wearing a human face. For 10 years, Minikichi lived a perfect life with a perfect wife. And in one terrible moment, he learned that his entire world was built on a foundation of ice, ready to shatter at the slightest misstep. He was spared, but he was not free. He was now a prisoner of his own survival, forever looking over his shoulder, forever listening for the sound of a winter wind on a clear night, forever waiting for the cold to come back for him. Years bled into one another, each winter a fresh torment. Mosaku never spoke of what happened in that hut. How could he? Who would believe him? They'd call him mad, a man broken by the storm. But the truth was a shard of ice lodged in his heart, a cold that no summer sun could ever truly melt. He'd see her in the reflection of a window pane on a frosty morning, hear her voice in the whistle of the wind through the eaves. He avoided the mountains, the very sight of snow-capped peaks in the distance enough to send a tremor through his hands. He worked, he ate, he slept, but he didn't truly live. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by a phantom made of snow and moonlight. The villagers noticed the change, of course. The once cheerful, boisterous young man was now quiet, reserved, his eyes holding a permanent shadow. They chalked it up to the grief of losing his mentor, the trauma of being lost in the blizzard. They gave him his space, and in that space his fear festered. Every promise is a debt, and his was a debt to a goddess of death. He knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as a frozen river, that she was watching. The vow he had made was a chain, invisible but unbreakable, binding his life to her whim. He was living on borrowed time, and the interest was compounding with every breath he took. Then one day she appeared. Not the monster from his nightmares, but a woman. She arrived in the village as spring was breathing life back into the world, a time of new beginnings. Her name was Yuki. No one knew where she came from. She was simply there, and she was beautiful, not in a common earthly way. Her beauty was serene, otherworldly. Her skin was flawless, pale as the first snowdrop pushing through the thawing soil. Her hair was a river of polished jet, and her eyes held a depth that seemed to reflect the quiet stillness of a winter forest. She moved with a silent grace that was captivating, and she spoke in a voice that was soft, like the sound of snow falling on snow. Mosaku, who had sworn off connection, who had built walls of ice around his own heart, found himself inexplicably drawn to her. When he was near her, the constant thrum of anxiety in his chest seemed to quiet. Her presence was a strange kind of peace, a cool, soothing balm on his scarred soul. He fought it at first. He reminded himself of the danger, of the promise, of the face that looked so very much like hers, framed by a blizzard's fury. But Yuki was nothing like the creature from the storm. She was gentle, she was kind. Her smile was like the winter sun, a rare and precious warmth that didn't burn but simply was. He'd watch her as she worked, her hands moving with an effortless precision, whether she was weaving cloth or tending to a small garden. She seemed immune to the petty squabbles and gossip of the village. She existed in her own tranquil sphere, and slowly, cautiously, Mosaku found himself wanting to enter it. He began to speak with her, short, hesitant conversations at first. He found that she was a listener, her dark eyes fixed on him, making him feel as though he were the only person in the world. For the first time in a decade he felt seen. Not as the haunted survivor of the blizzard, but just as Mosaku. The village watched the courtship with a gentle curiosity. It was good to see the young man smile again. It was good to see life returning to his eyes. And Yuki, the beautiful stranger, seemed to be the cause. They fell in love not with a fiery passion, but like the slow, inevitable freezing of a lake, a quiet and powerful transformation. He asked her to be his wife. He did it with a heart full of terror and hope, terror that his past would catch up to him, that bringing someone into his life was a betrayal of his vow. But the hope she offered was stronger, the hope for a life free from the ghosts of the past, a life of warmth and family. When she said yes, her voice as soft as ever, Mosaku felt the shard of ice in his heart finally, blessedly, begin to melt. They were married. Their home became a sanctuary of warmth and light against the world. With Yuki, Mosaku found a happiness he never thought possible. The nightmares began to fade, replaced by dreams of a future. He no longer flinched at the sound of the wind. The sight of snow became just snow, a simple fact of the seasons, not a harbinger of doom. The memory of the Yuki Onna receded, becoming a dark fairy tale he'd once been a part of, a story so fantastical it could hardly have been real. Had he imagined it all? A hallucination brought on by cold and grief? Looking at his beautiful, gentle wife, it seemed the only logical explanation. Yuki was a perfect wife. She was devoted, loving, and seemed to anticipate his every need before he knew it himself. Their home was always peaceful, always immaculate. And in time their joy multiplied. They had children, beautiful children, with their mother's pale skin and their father's strong spirit. They were a perfect family. Mosaka's life, once a barren wasteland of fear, was now a garden in full bloom. He was a husband, a father. He was happy, truly deeply happy. The vow he had made in that freezing hut, the promise extracted under the threat of an icy death, was buried under years of domestic bliss. It was a forgotten secret, locked away in a part of his mind he no longer visited. For 10 years they lived this perfect life. 10 years of warmth, of laughter, of watching their children grow. The past was a foreign country. One night a fierce snowstorm raged outside, much like the one from all those years ago. The wind howled and threw itself against the walls of their small, sturdy house. But inside it was safe. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, orange glow across the room. Mosaka sat with his children, mending a tool, while Yuki sat nearby, sewing by the firelight. The children were sleepy, lulled by the warmth and the storm's fury outside. Looking at his wife, her face serene and beautiful in the flickering light, Mosaka was overcome with a wave of love and gratitude. He felt safe. He felt whole. He smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "You know," he said, his voice casual, filled with the easy comfort of a long and happy marriage. "Watching you like this, you remind me of someone I met a long, long time ago. It's a strange story. I was young, caught in a terrible storm just like this one." He paused, the memory surfacing easily now, stripped of its terror by the passage of time and the safety of his home. "There was this woman I saw. She was out in the snow. As beautiful as you are, but terrifying. Her eyes and her voice, so cold. It all feels like a dream now." He chuckled softly, shaking his head at the foolishness of his youth. He looked up from his work, expecting to see his wife's gentle smile, her quiet curiosity. But Yuki was not smiling. She had stopped sewing. The needle was frozen in her hand. Her head was tilted, and the face she turned to him was no longer the face of his wife. The warmth was gone, replaced by a terrifying, absolute stillness. The firelight seemed to drain from her skin, leaving it a luminous, chilling white. And her eyes were suddenly ancient, deep, and filled with a cold, glittering fury that he recognized with a jolt of pure, soul-shattering horror. Her soft voice, the voice that had been his comfort for a decade, was now a whisper of ice and wind. "That woman, you said she was terrifying? You promised her, didn't you? You promised you would never speak of it. You promised me." Minikichi's blood ran cold. Colder than the blizzard that had claimed his master. Colder than the touch of death he'd felt a decade ago. The words didn't make sense, yet they struck a chord of primal terror deep within his soul. He stared at his wife, the mother of his children, the woman he had loved with every fiber of his being for 10 perfect years. But the face looking back at him was changing. The warmth in her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile, it was all vanishing. Like breath on a frozen pane of glass. The air in the small hut grew frigid. A sudden biting cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside and everything to do with the woman standing before him. Frost began to creep in delicate, feathery patterns across the wooden walls, not from the window, but radiating outwards from where she stood. His own breath plumed in front of his face, a thick white cloud in the sudden winter of his home. Oyuki's skin, always fair, was becoming a luminous, otherworldly white. The pure, terrifying white of fresh fallen snow under a dead winter moon. Her dark hair seemed to drink the light from the room, and her eyes were no longer the warm, loving pools of black he knew. They were chips of obsidian, reflecting a cold, ancient sorrow and a fury that was not human. She took a step toward him and he scrambled backward, a choked gasp escaping his lips. She didn't walk. She glided. Her feet made no sound on the floorboards, as if she were floating on a current of Arctic air. The soft fabric of her kimono stiffened, turning to what looked like woven frost, shimmering with a faint ghostly light. "You fool!" she hissed, and the sound was the wind shearing over a mountain peak, the crack of ice underfoot. "You absolute fool! Did you think it was just a story? A dream? Did you think a promise made to a being of winter could be broken like a twig?" Minikichi's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impossible. The woman in the snowstorm, the ethereal beauty who had spared his life, his wife Oyuki, they were one and the same. The realization hit him not like a wave, but like an avalanche, burying him in a crushing weight of horror and disbelief. He had been living with a ghost. He had been married to death itself. "Oh, Yuki, no," he stammered, his voice trembling, pathetic. "That is not my name," the being before him stated, her voice devoid of all warmth, all affection. "That was the name for a mortal life. A life you just destroyed." She raised a hand, and her fingers were long and slender, tapering to points that looked as sharp as icicles. A single perfect snowflake materialized in the air above her palm, spinning lazily. "I should kill you," she whispered, the words hanging in the frozen air between them. "It is my nature. It is the law of my existence. You saw my true form and I let you live on one condition. One simple promise. And you couldn't even keep that. For a moment of foolish pride, telling a story to your mother, you have thrown it all away." Tears streamed down Minikichi's face, freezing on his cheeks. He wasn't just afraid for his life. He was heartbroken. The love he felt was real. The family they had built was real. He looked past the terrifying visage of the snow woman and tried to see the wife he adored. The children. He pleaded, his voice cracking. "Oh, Yuki, please, our children." At the mention of their children, something flickered in those cold, dark eyes. A hesitation. A crack in the icy facade. The absolute, unyielding rage wavered, replaced by an emotion that was somehow even more painful to witness. A profound, bottomless grief. She looked toward the room where their 10 children slept, bundled and safe, unaware that their world was shattering. "Yes," she said, her voice softening but losing none of its chilling power. "The children. If it were not for them, if I did not have to consider what would become of them, I would freeze the very blood in your veins right now. I would leave you a frozen statue in this room as a monument to your stupidity." She lowered her hand, and the snowflake vanished. The killing intent receded, but the cold remained. "But I cannot harm their father," she continued, a tear tracing a path down her impossibly white cheek, not freezing but shimmering like a liquid diamond. "Even if I must leave them, you have broken your vow. I cannot stay here. I cannot be Oyuki any longer." She began to back away, her form becoming less distinct, more ethereal. She was dissolving, her edges blurring into the swirling frost that now filled the small house. "Take care of them, Minikichi," her voice echoed, seeming to come from all around him now. It was the voice of his wife, laced with the sorrow of the spirit. "You have taken their mother from them. The least you can do is be a good father." He tried to stand, to reach for her, to beg her to stay, but his limbs were heavy, frozen with fear and despair. He could only watch as she reached the door. It swung open on its own, revealing a raging blizzard outside, a wall of white that seemed to welcome her home. She turned for one last look, no longer the woman he knew, but a tall, beautiful, and terrible spirit of the snow. Then she stepped out into the storm and was gone. The door slammed shut, the unnatural frost in the room receded, and the air began to warm. But for Minikichi, the world would never be warm again. He was left alone, with his 10 sleeping children and the crushing, eternal weight of his broken promise. This story, immortalized by the writer Lafcadio Hearn, is the most famous depiction of the Yuki Onna. It is the one that has defined her in the popular imagination. A being of lethal beauty, capable of both immense cruelty and surprisingly deep human-like love. But it is precisely this contradiction that makes her so fascinating. Is she a monster? Or is she a tragic figure? The Minikichi story paints her as both. She is a killer who spares a life out of a whim, and a loving wife who must abandon her family because of a sacred, broken oath. This duality is the absolute core of the Yuki Onna myth. She is not a simple, one-dimensional demon. She embodies the dual nature of winter itself. Winter is beautiful, the pristine, silent blanket of snow, the intricate frost on a window pane. But it is also deadly. The blizzard that freezes you in your tracks, the unforgiving cold that leeches the life from your body. The Yuki Onna is the personification of that beautiful, terrible paradox. And depending on where in Japan you are, one side of that paradox might be emphasized over the other. In some regions like Niigata or Aomori, where winters are incredibly harsh and claim lives every year, the legends of the Yuki Onna are far more sinister. There, she is often depicted as a vampiric entity, a snow ghoul that preys on lost travelers. She doesn't just freeze them. She is said to suck out their life force, their very soul, through a kiss or by breathing her frozen breath upon them, leaving behind a hollow, ice-rimed corpse. In these versions, there is no room for love or mercy. She is a predator, and the snow is her hunting ground. Other tales portray her not as a predator, but as a test, a moral or spiritual trial. In one legend, a Yuki Onna appears to two brothers caught in a blizzard. She offers to guide the younger brother to safety, but only if he agrees to leave his older, injured brother behind. When the young man refuses, choosing to stay and die with his sibling, the Yuki Onna is so moved by his loyalty that she relents, guiding them both to the safety of a nearby village. In this context, she isn't a monster to be feared, but a supernatural arbiter of human character. She is the spirit of the mountain, testing the hearts of those who dare to enter her domain. And then there are the truly tragic variations, stories that suggest she wasn't always a spirit of ice. Some legends whisper that a Yuki Onna is the ghost, the unwary, of a woman who perished in the snow. Perhaps she was a young mother trying to find shelter for her child, or a woman betrayed by a lover and left to die in a blizzard. In these tellings, her actions are not born of malice, but of an endless, sorrowful longing. She drifts through the snowstorms, forever searching for what she lost: a child, a lover, a life. When she encounters travelers, she may inadvertently lead them astray or freeze them solid, not out of cruelty, but because her very presence, her very being, is an embodiment of the fatal cold that claimed her. Her touch is death because she is death, a lonely, wandering specter of a life cut short by the unforgiving power of winter. So which is she? The vengeful spirit, the loving wife, the vampiric predator, or the sorrowful ghost? The answer is all of them. The Yuki Onna is a complex, multifaceted being, a reflection of humanity's relationship with the natural world. She is as unpredictable and as dangerous as the winter storms from which she is born. And this very unpredictability is what makes every encounter with her a terrifying gamble. You never know which Yuki Onna you are about to meet. Will it be the one who offers a swift, cold death? Or the one who, for reasons of her own, might just let you live to tell the tale? This very unpredictability is the source of her deepest horror, but it's also the key to understanding her. So where does this chilling duality come from? Is she a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely? The answer isn't simple, because the Yuki Onna is not one single entity. She is a confluence of beliefs, a crystallization of different fears and sorrows that have swirled through the Japanese consciousness for centuries. To unravel her mystery, we have to look at the competing theories of her origin, each one painting a different, terrifying portrait of the Snow Woman. The first, and perhaps most tragic theory, casts her as a unwary, a ghost in the classic Japanese sense. She is the restless soul of a woman who perished in the snow. Perhaps she was a traveler caught in an unexpected blizzard, a young mother who froze while trying to protect her child, or a woman betrayed and left to die in the winter wilderness. In this interpretation, her actions are driven by the profound sorrow and bitterness of her own death. She is a soul tethered to the place of her demise, forever reenacting her final, freezing moments. When she appears to a lost traveler, she isn't just a monster. She is a specter of what awaits them. Her cold breath is the memory of the air that stole her own. Her touch is the phantom sensation of frostbite claiming her limbs. Her rage is the echo of her own desperate, unanswered cries for help. This version of the Yuki Onna is deeply personal. Her malice is born of suffering. She kills because she suffered. She leads men astray because she herself was lost. And sometimes, just sometimes, she shows mercy. Why? Because in the face of a loving couple, a devoted father, or a frightened child, she might see a reflection of the life she lost, a flicker of warmth in the endless cold of her existence. This ghostly origin makes her a figure of immense pathos. She is terrifying, yes, but she is also a tragedy, a warning etched in ice. But there is another, far older and more primal interpretation, one that strips away the human tragedy and replaces it with something far more alien and vast. This theory paints her not as a ghost of a human, but as a yokai or even a kami, a spirit of nature itself. She is not the ghost of winter. She is winter. She is the blizzard's beautiful, terrible heart, the silent, heavy fall of snow that buries a village, the razor-sharp wind that cuts through the thickest clothing, the deceptive beauty of a pristine, untouched snowdrift that hides a fatal crevasse. She is the personification of all of it. In this view, her actions have no human motive. She doesn't kill out of vengeance or sorrow. She kills because it is her nature. A blizzard doesn't feel malice when it freezes a traveler. It is simply being a blizzard. The Yuki Onna, as a winter elemental, operates on the same principle. Her beauty is the allure of a calm, sunny winter's day, and her lethality is the sudden, violent storm that follows. She is a force of nature, and her moods are as unpredictable as the weather. She might spare a man simply because his presence is no more significant to her than a single stone in the mountain pass. She might murder another for a reason as simple and inscrutable as the wind changing direction. This isn't vengeance. It's just nature. Impersonal, absolute, and unforgiving. This version is, in many ways, more terrifying than the ghost. You can't reason with a storm. You can't appeal to the humanity of a glacier. You can only hope it passes you by. As Japanese society evolved, so too did the story of the Yuki Onna. She began to occupy a third space, not just as a ghost or a nature spirit, but as a powerful psychological symbol. She became an embodiment of a very specific kind of fear, the seductive danger of isolation. Think about it. She appears to men who are alone, cut off from society in the deep, silent wilderness of winter. Her appearance is a test. Her supernatural beauty is a temptation, a stark contrast to the harsh, brutal reality of survival. She is the beautiful face of death, the serene allure of giving up, of simply lying down in the snow and letting the cold take you. She represents the terrifying idea that death might not come as a monster, but as a beautiful, calming release from struggle. She becomes a mirror, reflecting our own anxieties about the wilderness, about being far from the warmth and safety of home, and about the seductive whisper of oblivion that can be found in the perfect, silent whiteout of a snowstorm. This evolution from a raw, monstrous force to a more complex, psychological figure is most famously captured in the story that made her a global icon. While tales of snow spirits existed for centuries, it was the writer Lafcadio Hearn, in his 1904 book Kwaidan, Stories and Studies of Strange Things, who collected and retold a version of her story that would define her for the modern world. His telling humanized her, giving her emotions, motivations, and a fatal flaw, the capacity to love. In his version, a young woodcutter named Minikichi and his master are caught in a blizzard and take shelter in a hut. The Yuki Onna appears, killing the old master with her icy breath. But when she turns to Minikichi, she hesitates. Struck by his youth and beauty, she spares him, but only on one condition. He must swear never to speak of what he has seen. If he breaks his promise, she will return and kill him. Years pass. Minikichi meets a beautiful woman named Yuki, and they fall in love, marry, and have 10 children. They live a happy, idyllic life. But Yuki never seems to age. One night, looking at his wife's face in the lamplight, Minikichi is suddenly reminded of the terrifying spirit in the hut. Forgetting his vow, he tells her the story of his strange encounter with the beautiful and deadly snow woman. As he finishes, his wife's face transforms. She rises in fury, her voice filled with spectral cold. "It was I. I was that woman," she shrieks. "I told you I would kill you if you ever spoke of it." She moves to kill him, but looks at their sleeping children. Her rage gives way to a mother's sorrow. For their sake, she spares him again. "But if they have any reason to complain of you," she warns, "I will come back and treat you as you deserve." And with that, she melts into a fine white mist and vanishes into the stormy night, never to be seen again. This story is a masterpiece of folklore because it combines all three interpretations of the Yuki Onna into one narrative. She is the deadly nature spirit who kills the old man without a thought. She is the ghost-like figure who makes a supernatural pact. And most importantly, she is a psychological being, one capable of human emotions like love, pity, and maternal devotion. Her decision to spare Minikichi twice, once for his beauty and once for their children, is what makes her so compelling. It shows a crack in her icy facade, a vulnerability, but it also introduces a new, terrifying dimension to her character. Her threat is not just death, but the chilling promise that she is still watching. Her love for her children, now a conditional curse hanging over her husband's head. This maternal instinct, this flicker of warmth, is perhaps the key that unlocks her most contradictory behaviors. It explains why she might spare a child, or a man who shows kindness, while mercilessly freezing another. It adds a layer of tragic, relatable humanity to an otherwise alien entity. So what is she? A vengeful ghost mourning a life cut short? A merciless nature deity, as beautiful and deadly as winter itself? A tragic lover and mother, caught between her and human nature and her human heart? The terrifying answer is, she is all of them. The Yuki Onna is a composite nightmare, A story that has absorbed centuries of fears about the cold, about isolation, and about the beautiful things that can kill us. She is not a single stable legend. She is a reflection of whoever is telling the story, and more importantly, of whoever is listening. But it was that one specific telling, the story of a broken promise and a vanished wife, that would launch her from the snowy mountains of Japan onto the world stage, cementing her place as one of the most iconic and terrifying figures in all of global folklore. This version of the tale, the one that would echo through time, comes to us through a man who was himself a bridge between worlds. A Greek-Irish writer who fell so deeply in love with the folklore of his adopted home that he dedicated his life to preserving it. His name was Lafcadio Hearn, and in his 1904 masterpiece, Stories and Studies of Strange Things, he took a local legend and polished it into a jewel of supernatural literature, a story of love, terror, and a single fatal mistake. His telling begins in the province of Musashi, with two woodcutters, one old, one young. The old man was Mosaku. His apprentice, a strong boy of 18, was Minikichi. Every day they would walk from their village to a forest about 5 miles away, a journey that was routine, predictable, and safe, until one day it wasn't. On their way home, they were ambushed by a snowstorm, a blizzard of such sudden and blinding ferocity that it seemed the sky itself was collapsing upon them. The wind howled like a starving wolf, and the snow fell not in flakes, but in a solid, suffocating curtain of white. They lost the path in moments, stumbling through drifts that grew deeper with every step. They knew that to be caught in the open meant certain death. By a stroke of luck, they spotted a ferryman's hut, empty and abandoned for the winter. It was little more than a shack, with no brazier for a fire and no matting to cover the floor, but it was shelter. They forced the door shut against the storm, secured it with a heavy log, and huddled together in the darkness, their thin clothes offering little protection against a cold that was seeping through the very walls. The old man, Mosaku, succumbed to the chill almost immediately, his breathing growing shallow as he drifted into an exhausted sleep. Minikichi, younger and stronger, fought to stay awake, listening to the terrifying symphony of the storm outside, the roar of the wind, the creaking of the wooden hut as it strained against the assault. He thought they would be lucky to see the morning. He had no idea how wrong he was. Sometime in the dead of night, the wind tore the door from its moorings, slamming it open with a deafening crash. Minikichi was jolted awake, and in the sudden flood of moonlight on snow, he saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman. She was impossibly tall and slender, dressed in a kimono as white as the snowbank she seemed to have emerged from. Her long black hair streamed behind her like a banner of night, a stark contrast to her face, which was a white of an almost translucent quality. She was, in that first shocking moment, the most beautiful thing Minikichi had ever seen. But then she moved, gliding into the hut without a sound, and the beauty was eclipsed by a terrifying, unnatural grace. She drifted towards the sleeping Mosaku and bent over him. Minikichi, frozen by a fear he had never known, could only watch as she breathed upon the old man's face. Her breath was a pale white vapor like smoke. In an instant, Mosaku's face was coated in frost, and he was still. He was dead. The snow woman then turned to Minikichi. She floated towards him, bending so low that her face was inches from his. He could see her eyes now. They were not human. They were deep violet pools that held the cold, ancient power of the storm. He tried to scream, but no sound would come out. He was paralyzed, trapped in her gaze, waiting for the same icy breath that had claimed his master. But she only looked at him, a strange, almost curious expression on her perfect face. After a long moment, a smile touched her lips, but it was a smile without warmth, like the gleam of moonlight on a blade. "I intended to treat you the same as the other," she whispered, her voice like the sighing of the wind through pine trees. "But I cannot help but feel a little pity for you. You are so young. And you are a handsome boy, Minikichi. I will not harm you now, but you must make me a promise. You must never, to anyone, speak of what you have seen this night. If you ever mention me, even a single word, I will know. And I will come for you. And I will kill you." With that warning hanging in the frozen air, she turned, glided through the doorway, and vanished into the swirling blizzard. The moment she was gone, the spell was broken. Minikichi scrambled to his feet, his body shaking uncontrollably, and peered out into the white chaos. But there was nothing. No footprints, no sign she had ever been there. Just the endless, raging storm. When the blizzard finally broke at dawn, Minikichi found his master frozen solid. He stumbled back to his village, delirious and sick from the cold, but he survived, and he kept his promise. He told no one of the woman in white, attributing Mosaka's death to the brutal cold. The terror of that night was locked away, a secret he intended to carry to his grave. A year passed, the seasons turned, and the memory of the snow woman began to feel less like a real event and more like a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by the cold. One evening, on his way home from a neighboring village, Minikichi met a young woman. She was traveling alone, and her name, she said, was Oyuki. She was tall, slender, and incredibly beautiful, with a gentle voice and a kind heart. She was hoping to travel to the city of Edo to find work as a servant, but had lost her way. Minikichi, captivated, invited her to rest at his home with his mother. Oyuki proved to be a perfect guest, charming, helpful, and pleasant. Minikichi's mother took an immediate liking to her, and before long, she suggested that Minikichi should marry her. And so he did. Their marriage was one of impossible happiness. Oyuki was the perfect wife. She was devoted, loving, and seemed to possess a preternatural grace. She never seemed to age, retaining the same youthful beauty she had on the day they met. Together, they had 10 children, all of them fair-skinned and beautiful like their mother. The village marveled at their good fortune. Minikichi was a happy man, his life filled with the warmth of a family he adored. The frozen hut, the dead old man, the terrifying promise made to a phantom of the snow. It was all but forgotten. Then came another winter night, nearly a decade after their marriage. The children were asleep, and Oyuki was by the light of a paper lamp, sewing a new kimono. Minikichi watched her, his heart filled with love and gratitude. He watched the way the lamplight played across her pale, perfect profile, and as he looked at her, a memory cold and sharp pierced the warm veil of his contentment. He saw a faint, chilling resemblance to the beautiful, terrible creature from the blizzard all those years ago. It was just a fleeting thought, a foolish fancy. After 10 years of blissful marriage, the fear had finally faded, replaced by a comfortable intimacy. He felt the urge to share this last, dark secret with the woman he loved, to tell her about the strangest thing that had ever happened to him. "You know, Yuki," he said casually, a smile on his face, "seeing you there in the lamplight reminds me of something very strange. When I was a boy, I met a woman just as beautiful and white-skinned as you are. In fact, she looked very much like you." Oyuki kept sewing, not looking up, but he could feel the air in the room grow still. He continued, the story tumbling out, the words he had sworn never to speak now flowing freely. He told her of the storm, the hut, the death of old Mosaku, and he told her of the beautiful, terrifying snow woman who had spared his life on the condition of his eternal silence. As he finished his tale, he looked at his wife, expecting a gasp, or perhaps a laugh at his wild story. Instead, he saw a look of pure, incandescent rage. Oyuki threw down her sewing and rose to her feet, her face transformed. The gentle warmth was gone, replaced by an inhuman fury. "That woman was me!" she shrieked, and her voice was no longer the soft melody he had loved for 10 years, but the piercing scream of the winter wind. "It was I, and I told you what I would do if you ever spoke of it. I told you I would kill you." She lunged towards him, her eyes blazing with that same unearthly violet light he remembered from the hut. Minikichi cowered on the floor, certain his life was over. But as she loomed over him, her gaze fell upon their 10 sleeping children, nestled peacefully in the corner of the room. A flicker of something, a memory of love, a pang of maternal instinct, crossed her icy features. The killing rage subsided, replaced by a cold, final sorrow. "For their sake I will spare you," she hissed, her voice now a low, chilling whisper. "But you must take good care of our children. If you ever cause them to cry, or if they have any reason to complain of you, I will come back, and I will treat you as you deserve." Her words hung in the air, a final terrible promise, and then her form began to dissolve. Her body became a shimmering white mist, which swirled up towards the roof, flowed out of the smoke hole, and vanished into the night. She was gone. Minikichi was left alone in the silent room, with his sleeping children, the chilling draft of a broken promise, and the crushing weight of a love that was now nothing more than a ghost story. The years that followed were a long, silent winter for Minikichi. He never remarried. He raised his children with a quiet, aching tenderness, and they grew to be as beautiful and pale as their mother. But he never told them the truth. How could he? How could he explain that their mother was the winter wind, the silent fall of snow, a spirit bound by a promise he had shattered? Every winter, when the blizzards raged and the world turned white, he would sit by the fire, watching the snow pile up against the shoji screens. He'd stare into the swirling maelstrom outside, half in terror, half in a desperate, foolish hope that he might see her pale face in the storm, just one last time. But he never did. He grew old, and his children grew up and had families of their own, and the story of his beautiful, mysterious wife became just that, a story, a faded memory of a love too perfect to last. This tale, passed down through generations, is more than just a ghost story to tell on a cold night. It's a profound exploration of one of the most powerful forces in Japanese folklore, the duality of nature. The Yuki Onna is not simply a monster. She is the personification of winter itself. Think about it. Winter is breathtakingly beautiful. The first snowfall that blankets the world in a pristine, silent white. The delicate, crystalline patterns of frost on a window pane. It's serene, peaceful, almost magical. That is Yuki, the loving wife and mother, the embodiment of ethereal beauty and grace. But winter is also terrifyingly deadly. The blizzard that comes without warning. Its howling winds and blinding snow capable of freezing a man solid in minutes. The crushing, indifferent cold that seeps into your bones and extinguishes the flame of life. That is the Yuki Onna, the spirit of death who freezes travelers with a single, icy breath. She isn't good or evil, she is both. She is a force of nature, and like nature, she is beautiful, nurturing, and utterly unforgiving when her laws are broken. This story, immortalized by the writer Lafcadio Hearn, is fundamentally a cautionary tale about the weight of a promise. In many cultures, a promise is a social contract. But in this world of spirits and kami, a promise is a sacred, unbreakable vow. Minakichi's promise to the Yuki Onna wasn't just an agreement. It was the very foundation of their impossible life together. It was the magical barrier that held the terrifying power of winter at bay and allowed the warmth of a human family to exist. The moment he spoke of that night, the moment human carelessness broke the supernatural vow, the foundation crumbled. The magic was broken. Her departure wasn't just an act of anger or revenge. It was a cosmic correction. A snow spirit cannot live in a house where her true nature is known, just as a blizzard cannot be contained by four walls. Her final words, "If they have cause to complain of you, I will treat you as you deserve," weren't just a threat. They were a reminder that she was still there, watching, a force of nature that had retreated but not vanished. She was still a mother, but she was also still the snow woman. The tragedy of Minakichi is that he had it all. A love that transcended the boundary between worlds, a perfect family, a decade of impossible happiness. And he lost it not through malice, but through a moment of human weakness, a moment of sentimental storytelling. It's a heartbreakingly relatable failure. He didn't mean to betray her. He was simply remembering the woman he loved, the mother of his children, and in that moment, he forgot the terrifying spirit he had sworn silence to. It teaches a powerful lesson, that some things are too sacred to be spoken, some secrets are the pillars of our happiness, and that the consequences of breaking a vow to a power you don't understand are absolute and irreversible. There is no appeal, no second chance. There is only the cold, silent emptiness of what was lost. But the Yuki Onna's story didn't end in feudal Japan. Her chilling grace has drifted through time, her silhouette a constant, haunting presence in modern culture. She is one of the most recognizable and influential yokai in the world, a testament to the power of her story. If you've ever played Pokemon, you know her. The Ghost/Ice-type Frostless is a direct and brilliant interpretation of the Yuki Onna. It's a spirit born from the soul of a woman lost in a blizzard, known for freezing its prey with a -60-degree breath, and according to some lore, displaying its victims as frozen art. It perfectly captures her deadly beauty. In the world of anime, her influence is everywhere. From Yuki in Yu Yu Hakusho, an ice maiden whose tears turn into precious gems, to Tsurara Oikawa in Nura, Rise of the Yokai clan, who serves as a loyal and sometimes comically overprotective guardian. These characters often embody her core traits: an association with ice and snow, an otherworldly beauty, and a nature that is fiercely protective, yet potentially dangerous. Her presence extends deep into the world of video games, She appears as a formidable boss in games like Nioh, a terrifying spirit of snow and ice whose elegant kimono belies a swift and deadly power. In the long-running Shin Megami Tensei and Persona series, she is a recurring demon or persona you can recruit, often depicted as a beautiful but sorrowful figure, forever tied to the cold. And perhaps her most iconic and artistically significant appearance in the 20th century was in Masaki Kobayashi's legendary 1964 film, Kwaidan. This anthology film, a masterpiece of Japanese cinema, dedicates a segment to her story. It is a visual poem, with surreal hand-painted sets and a chilling atmosphere that perfectly captures the ethereal horror and tragic romance of the legend. The Yuki Onna in Kwaidan is mesmerizing, a figure of impossible ghostly beauty, whose movements are as silent and deliberate as falling snow. The film brought her story to a global audience, cementing her place as an icon of international folklore. So why, after centuries, does she still haunt us? Why does the image of a beautiful woman in the snow still send a shiver down our spine? Because the Yuki Onna represents a collection of deep, primal human fears and fascinations. She is the fear of being lost in the wilderness, of nature's beautiful but indifferent power. She is the embodiment of the uncanny valley, something that looks human but is fundamentally other, her beauty a lure that hides a fatal danger. But she is also a story about love and loss. Her tale with Minikichi is a tragic romance, a story of a love that was real and profound, but ultimately doomed by the very differences that made it magical. We are fascinated by the idea of bridging the gap between our world and the next, and heartbroken when that bridge inevitably collapses. She is the ultimate femme fatale, but one born of ice and sorrow, not of malice. Her story forces us to confront our own fragility, the consequences of our words, and the terrifying idea that a perfect life can be undone by a single careless breath. She is a reminder that the world is filled with a beauty that is older, wilder, and far more dangerous than we can possibly comprehend. The Snow Woman is more than a monster. She is a myth that has endured because it speaks to the very core of our relationship with the world around us. A world of breathtaking beauty and unspeakable terror, often at the very same time. She is the silent beauty of the first snow, and the screaming fury of the blizzard that follows. The next time you find yourself caught in a snowstorm, when the wind howls and whistles through the trees, and the world outside your window dissolves into a dizzying vortex of white, listen closely. You might just hear a soft, sorrowful voice in the gale. And when you see a beautiful, pale figure walking silently through the storm, don't call out. Don't follow. Just remember the story of Minikichi and the price of a broken promise. Because some beauty is meant only to be glimpsed from a distance, a fleeting vision of the cold, heartbreaking, and deadly magic that sleeps within the heart of winter.